I am delighted to moderate this discussion today with something near and dear to my heart, which is leveraging local and regional component relations during COVID-19. And it has changed a lot of things, and it has certainly had a significant impact on what's happening at that local level. So I think what we understand is that creating connections with members rather has never been more important than it is now, particularly among this pandemic. Travel restrictions in place for many associations for the foreseeable future. A number of my clients and my own management clients, we're talking about 21 at the earliest for a serious travel and in person. So chapters and local components are going to play a greater role in driving the growth, in nurturing existing relationships, and frankly, in providing those smaller scale in-person meetings and events. So that becomes the framework for today's conversation. The challenges, the pivots, the lessons learned that will impact the future. So before we get started here, I just want to quickly review a couple of logistics. At the bottom of your screen, you will see a Q&A button and a chat button. Many of you have already found the chat button. Thumbs up, double thumbs up for you guys. Please keep the chat going. You may use the Q&A for any questions for the panelists, but again, let's use the chat because I think, and all my panelists will nod their heads, we don't have all the answers, but we certainly have some questions and we want to hear what you guys have. Now, by the way, we will be recording this webcast and the recording link will be available within a week on the issue roundup page on ASAE's website, the COVID roundup page. If you haven't been there, it is an amazing resource, ever changing. So please, 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 please go ahead and do that. I am super excited to be here with who I would consider like 5 of the gurus around working with these geographic components, these member communities. And I'm going to ask each to go ahead and do an introduction of themselves. So I'm going to actually, let's cue it up with Wes Carr from Regulatory Affairs Professional Society. Wes.
Thank you, Peggy. Hi, everybody. I'm Wesley Carr. I am the Director of Stakeholder Engagement for the Regulatory Affairs Professional Society. We've got about 25, almost 26,000 members. My area encompasses member services, volunteer support, and our chapters. One note, our chapters are not separately incorporated from our organization, so the staff provides all the support and all those things. So again, that's kind of my perspective in today's webinar. So,
thanks, Wes. Alan from the Association for Women in Science, tell us about you.
I'm Alan Chewning, and we have about 3,000 members at the association. We, as an office, have been a virtual office for a number of years now, so this is not new to us. It is for our members. I oversee membership and our component relations. For us, that's chapters and affiliates. Our chapters are independently run, and our affiliates are typically tied with our institutional partners, which tend to be universities. And they're more of loosely based peer networking groups than a traditional chapter at that.
Okay, thank you, Alan. Nabil, we're bringing you all the way in from the other coast, because of course I'm on the East Coast. But welcome, and tell us a little bit about what you do and your folks with the California Association of Marriage and Family Therapists.
Thank you. I'm Nabil El-Ghoroury. I'm the Executive Director of the California Association of Marriage and Family Therapists. We have 32,000 members, and then we have 28 local chapters across the state. Most in the urban areas, but some in our rural areas, representing about 5,000 of our members. What's unique for us, for our organization, is that chapters has been made a board priority. So it is part of our strategic plan, and it's what we're working on, focusing on for the next 3 to 4 years.
Okay, great. Thank you, Nabil, and welcome. Now from the Society of Women Engineers, Karen, tell us a little bit about you and welcome.
Hi, so I'm Karen Horting, Executive Director and CEO for the Society of Women Engineers. We are 42,000 members. I'm based at our headquarters in Chicago. And in terms of our structure, we have about 400 what we call sections, but they operate basically like chapters. About 300 of those are collegiate, so just about any university that has an engineering program has a SWE section, and then a little over 100 professional sections, mainly in major metropolitan areas. We also have global affiliates, about 50 or 60 of those outside the US. And I would say most of our sections are not separately incorporated, but we have a section agreement that lists some basic things they need to do and adhere to. But I would say a lot of the things we'll talk about today would be suggestions versus things that, you know, headquarters might compel them to do.
Great. Awesome. And last, but of course not least, is Jessica from the American Society of Interior Designers. Jessica, say hello.
Hello, thank you. I'm Jessica Irizarry. I am with ASID, as Peggy mentioned. We are about 25,000 member strong organization with individual practitioners as well as an industry component, so manufacturers, suppliers, hotel, resellers, wholesalers, that kind of thing. I am program for chapter development. We are 100% incorporated, similar to Wesley. So we do not have any of our chapters separately incorporated. So my perspective is similar to his, but we don't necessarily provide all of the operational staff support for the chapters. A lot of our chapters do hire outside support through AMCs or part-time staff, 1099s, that kind of thing.
Great. So thank you. So for the folks that are joining us in on this webcast, you see that we have a really wonderful broad specter of the relationships from global to a state organization, from ones that have a real mixture of the collegiate to fully professional, to those that are integrated, whereas those that are that provide the more distant relationship, if you will. So in the chat, tell us what you're coming from. And if there's a specific question that we ask that you'd like to hear from your viewpoint, you know, also use the chat to let us know what's going on. I'm going to kick us off with, I'm going to call this a softball question to get us warmed up. But what are your chapters doing differently now than pre-COVID? And when I ask that question, I'm asking us to focus not on the how, like we know everybody pivoted to virtual, and presuming that most of yours did, but really on the what, as in new activities or fewer activities, perhaps. If it's okay, can I I'm going to just ask Wes to give us a kickoff here, and then we'll go from there. Wes. Let's unmute you first. Yeah, there you go.
I was on mute. Sorry about that, everybody. I know we all keep doing that, right? So thank you, Peggy. So in the pre-COVID world, right, in the old world, our chapter network, all of our chapters worldwide, conducted about 4 to 6 face-to-face activities a year, right? As I mentioned, those were supported by staff. We manage registration, all of those things. So as just about everyone has now gone to, those programs have now gone virtual. So we average about 5 chapter webcasts a month. But obviously, because of the virtual nature now, as opposed to maybe 30 or 40, 50 people at the face-to-face events, these chapter activities are now having 250 to 500 people participate, right? Mm-hmm. So what that's done is it's allowing our chapter leaders to still kind of drive their mission, which mm-hmm. is to, you know, to basically educate the profession and provide professional development, but on such a larger scale, you know. But the other kind of twist that we did, because again, we all are in challenging times, we also shifted those programs. We charge for face-to-face programs, right? You just had to recoup that money. But we shifted these virtual programs to now a member benefit. So this content, these chapter programs are now free for members. Non-members can still participate for a small fee. But so what we're really doing is we're again kind of the content that the chapters have been providing for years on a smaller scale is now just literally 10 times more. We're reaching 10 times more members and more people in the profession than the chapters ever could. So they are actually feeling even more involved and feeling that they're making a larger commitment to the profession and to the organization. And so that really is kind of, the one other point I want to make is some of our smaller chapters, like our Utah chapter, which is traditionally very small, compact chapter. They are now serving people in, you know, in our European markets, in our Asian markets, because we're having up to maybe 20 or 30, you know, countries represented on these activities versus primarily just local people for the regional programming. So again, it's really been, our chapter leaders have really felt involved, included. They feel that they are moving the needle on the mission more than ever before, all while we're also providing more value to the membership proposition, right? And so it's been very, I mean, again, that's the how. We've all shifted to the virtual, but again, just kind of the way we're going about it, we're trying to kill multiple birds, you know, with one stone.
Cool. And we should come back to that conversation of the blurring of the lines. But Karen, I saw you nodding as he was getting started. So what's your response to this question?
So I would just kind of build off what Wes was saying. And one of the things I think we've seen for our section and affiliate events is, because everything has gone virtual, the caliber of speakers that we're able to recruit for these things is just gone to a whole nother level. I was mentioning when we had our pre-conversation that tomorrow our Pune, India affiliate is hosting a virtual leadership program where the keynote speaker is the Chief Human Resources Officer from Unilever, who happens to be the first Asian woman to hold this role. And I know that had it just been a local event in Pune, they likely would not have been able to recruit her. But now we have something where, you know, we can promote it to all the affiliates in India and even outside of India, because it'll be recorded. And so it's really, I think, allowed the local entities to kind of take their programming up a notch, because it's just not who's in your local area. And also, I think people are maybe more willing to do it because they know they're going to have more exposure than just maybe, you know, 50 or 100 people at a local event.
Right. No, interesting. Nabil.
So one of the things that we've done as an organization is, so historically we have done workshops for our chapters. We provided a speaker for a law and ethics workshop that is required continuing education for our members. You need to do 6 hours, so this is a long workshop. And we would send one of our staff members to conduct this workshop. So we would subsidize essentially this free workshop. The chapter got to keep the revenue. With going to virtual, we obviously can't do the in-person events, but we've actually combined these webinars. So instead of serving one chapter at a time, we are doing 6 chapters at once, breaking it up into 1.5-hour chunks, because who wants to sit for a 6-hour webinar? And we've also had great attendance. So we went from 25 to 50 per each chapter event to 250 registrations, you know, very quickly. And then they still get to keep their revenue. They're not even paying for food and beverage anymore. So they're making a little more money, chapters.
So that's one of those. So far the freebie, that's really kind of a good news, is that they're looking at some expanded activities and some expanded speakers. But Alan, anything to jump in there and on this?
Yeah, the one thing that we've done is more of an outreach, since, you know, activities have come to a halt. So we don't have staff members traveling. We don't have CAO traveling to any of these events. We've launched what we call Fireside Fridays, and it's an email every Friday with a 2 to 3 minute video message from our CEO with just highlights from the week. And then we always try to highlight a member and or a chapter. And then there's a, you know, brief write-up about things, and usually any new jobs posted that are highlighted in the email, and that goes just to our members, not to our entire database. So it's really just trying to keep in touch and let people know that we're still there, even though we're not, you know, in an office and they're not in their offices.
Okay. Jessica?
We actually started almost immediately when the shutdown was announced, offering webinars that week, including our membership, inviting folks to participate on panels to talk about what they're experiencing. We started polling and surveying our members so we could get some relevant content data for the next week, and we did it very habitually. So it was the same time, same day, and there was always follow-up. So there was constant contact. There was increased participation, but I think the biggest difference is that there was relevant content. So I was really impressed with our organization's ability to pivot very quickly and to maneuver a very continuously messy atmosphere in a successful and relevant way that engaged our members and provided an additional layer of value and member benefit.
So we're hearing across the five of you this this opportunity that the virtual education, the virtual platform, and quite frankly, the fact that it's a time saver. And Nabil very nicely and reminding us it's also a dollar saver, right? But I got to ask this question, and this is going to be kind of I'm going to go broader than maybe some of the things that we initially laid out. But that is a tremendous blurring of the geographic boundaries. And the conversation we started off today with is about the geographically drawn member communities, right? And I don't know, from a show of hands, kind of like how many of you also have, knowledge groups or special interest groups, which generally are virtual. But our geographic is usually about what do they have to do, the footprint that they have to have at the actual, at that local level. So I'm curious as to what you are thinking about, maybe what you're seeing, what you're thinking about, how that may turn cannibalistic for national. It could be, if not cannibalistic, competition. Maybe though it's a complementary, maybe it's about being collaborative. But I think we have to be very honest that as these boundaries blur, there's going to get into what we normally do as national organizations. And so I'm curious as to what you're seeing or thinking, and if you've begun to have conversations, what are those conversations along that particular area? I'm gonna I know, Wes, I don't want to pick on you every time, but one of the interesting things that you said was this notion of your calendar suddenly it's now reflecting everything. So are you looking at this as not cannibalistic then? Or what's your education strategy looking like?
Absolutely. I mean, this is like really at the bottom of this entire conversation, right? I mean, I've got to be honest, myself, a lot of my colleagues internally, we were concerned about that. When we moved to this new world, we were extremely concerned about the chapter content, competing directly with HQ. There's only so many speakers, right? And a lot of our chapter speakers are familiar and use some of the same speakers we do for HQ. So there was a lot of concern there, right? When they were local activities on a Thursday evening in St. Louis, that wasn't much of a big deal, right? So what we found though, and we've been doing this a few months now, what we found though, it's been more complementary than competitive or cannibalism, or whatever the right term there is, right? Because our headquarter programs, the majority of our virtual activities, we shifted our workshops to now virtual. So they're typically a 2-day program that's a really deep dive into a particular topic with multiple speakers. Where the chapter activities, these virtual webcasts that we're doing, 5 a month, 1 hour, maybe 90 minutes. Sometimes it's the same speaker, but it's a 35-minute presentation followed by, by conversation. That almost, and then it also provides another opportunity to market some of our other full-day workshops on similar topics. But you may have gotten a little taste of it by attending a free member webinar. Okay, well, we're also having this deeper dive down the road, and we have actually seen most of our virtual activities, the HQ programs, have been performing very well. So the cannibalism is definitely something to worry about, but it hasn't materialized. Our education department is actually appreciative as opposed to threatened by what the chapters are doing. That's my last point.
So that's really neat. So it's this puzzle, right? And I love how the smaller ones are over here and they feed into the other ones. What's happening for the rest of you along this conversation? Alan, I saw you nodding your head earlier.
So I would agree. It's definitely complementary. And in some of our smaller chapters, I'll use Los Angeles for an example. Just the geography of Los Angeles and the traffic there made it so hard to do in-person activities before this happened. They're now seeing the entire Zoom feature conference call as a much more engaging way for their members to talk, because they no longer worry about sitting in traffic for 2.5 hours to get down the road. So there's a complementary thing there. And then there's also, what we're seeing is there's more collaboration with outside organizations. Our San Francisco, we have 5 chapters in the San Francisco area, again, because of traffic. But one of them is doing a 5-part series with the American Chemical Society's California chapter. And so that was set up before COVID, but that has blossomed not only from a San Francisco area series, it's now national, because they've opened it up because you can attend virtually, and they've been able to bring in more prominent speakers. So I'm not seeing the cannibalization yet. I'm definitely seeing new avenues for correspondence and working with others that may not have been on anybody's radar 6 months ago.
Right. So interesting point. I bet that, Jessica, you've got maybe a different perspective. So weigh in for us.
Yeah, I do. I agree with Alan and Wes about there's a lack of cannibalism between the chapter and the component network and HQ, but I do see some opportunity where the cannibalism would happen chapter to chapter to chapter, competing for those dollars, competing for that exposure, competing for the airtime, because nobody, as we said earlier, nobody wants to sit in front of a computer screen for 6 hours a day. So they're choosing the type of content and the delivery. So I think that in that way, that's something that HQ, and my job is to kind of look out for, to make sure that we're still focusing on our mission, that our objectives and our activities are driving that mission forward, but then we're also able to offer support and build the community. So for example, basically a big part of my job is to try to break down those barriers, those geographic barriers, because ultimately from our perspective, we move the mission forward better as one voice. So, but once you start talking about somebody's wallet or their pocketbook, things become a little bit more contentious. But I will say from a headquarters perspective, it has been a compliment, but I am keeping an eye out for the competition between the chapter from network to network.
Right. So it's interesting just to share a real quick story, because I'm so glad you underscored that, Jessica. The Associated General Contractors, they were talking about this in a conversation around the chapter to chapter competition. And one of the things that came out was one of their execs said, well, I'm putting on this virtual training and I'll offer it to the other chapters, but there'll be a revenue share. And that was the thing that made a difference. It'll be a revenue share. So and one of the other execs simply turned around and said, thank you, because I don't have the capacity to figure out how to put that level of course on. You figure that out and I'll send my people there. So thank you for underscoring that, because it's not always just national to local. Anybody else want to weigh in on this idea of complementary versus collaborative versus competitive versus cannibalistic? Karen?
I mean, I would just add similar, I think, to Jessica, for us, it's really about providing member value. And so given that everything's just been turned upside down, we want to make sure that we're delivering that member value, whether that's through virtual programming or, we launched a new mentoring platform, or just providing headquarters support for getting some of the section work done, whatever that might be, but making sure that the individual member is feeling supported and that they're getting what they need. Because I think in a lot of cases, they don't care if it's from the local section or headquarters or an affiliate halfway around the world. It's like they want their professional development, they want their network, they want to be connected to people. And so it's back to the, staying focused on the mission and making sure that we're delivering it, regardless of where it's coming from.
Right. So Karen and Nabil, I want to stay with the two of you for just a moment to explore that just a little bit further. And the reason why is you both are CEOs. You have to figure out where this strategy fits in. And one of the interesting things that you just said, and you're reflecting what Jessica said about this, is a mission. We have to know where we're going. But it sounds to me like the two of you are stepping back in a really broad way. And to a certain degree, we heard this in Wes's example of the education, but stepping back and saying, what does the member need? And then how do we engage it? Can either of you just talk a little bit to that point about, beginning to, where do chapters fit into that broader strategy around member engagement? And maybe that's new. Maybe that's it's the new conversation.
I'll go ahead and start on that one. So, we have 32,000 members across the state. There's no way that we can provide the networking opportunities that our members want. And so we really rely on our chapters to provide that local networking that is of immense value to members, about sharing business and knowing where to refer clients who come in for, my members are therapists. They get clients they don't treat, but they want to know who to send them to. So actually, in response also to the just last question, I'm trying to be intentional about pairing up chapters, because we do have struggling chapters that tend to be in the rural areas, and then my urban areas are doing well. So we're just in the beginning stages of this. We haven't tested this out yet. But what I'm going to try to do is pair chapters that don't overlap. So, an LA strong chapter with a far Northern California struggling chapter, and then a San Francisco chapter with a struggling distant Southern California chapter, to try to make sure that there isn't a natural sense of competition, because my LA chapters do compete a little bit for speakers and for attendees. So I am trying to be intentional in that strategy.
Right. Karen, anything to add there?
Yeah, so for us, some of it is just kind of taking a step back and looking at what kind of support can we provide. So we have a couple of things that we've always had in place. One is what we call our leadership coaching committee. So this was a committee made up of subject matter experts that could help local leadership, whether it was from recruiting members to fundraising to conflict resolution, those sorts of topics. And they would travel, they would go out, they would work with section leaders. Maybe they would get a few sections together for some training. And obviously that's not going to happen now. So now they're doing virtual office hours, and they're, trying to be there to be that sounding board. And I mean, that just wasn't, you kind of think of it now and you're like, well, why didn't we always do something like this? But again, and then also a lot of the leadership training that we would do at the start of a fiscal year tended to be in person, and it was always a bit limited by travel funds and what somebody may have going on in their day job and being able to travel and participate in the training. And now this year we're like, wow, we can open it up to all these more people. And yes, it's not going to be a full day, because to Jessica's point, nobody wants to sit for 6 hours, but we're going to be able to get a lot more of our leaders kind of on the same page. And as we go through the year, a big focus for us this year is diversity, equity, and inclusion. And our leaders have been asking for more training in this area. How do we be more inclusive in our local activities? How do we have conversations around diversity and inclusion? How do we recruit more diverse leaders into our local activities? And so we're like, wow, now we can do some of this training, because we've long talked about a consistent SWE experience, a consistent leadership experience, and kind of how do you do that? And now we've kind of been given a gift of having to do these things differently. And so we're kind of looking at it like, let's take advantage of this and see how we can, use the training, use our volunteer leaders and subject matter experts to provide some additional support, more than we've probably ever been able to do in the past.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. I love that. I had to write that down because I think this idea that you can't separate the DEI conversation from any conversation we're having now, and we shouldn't. But the question is, how do we help leaders who we only get a slice of the time? So that's a neat concept to think about. We did get a question in the chat, and I want to throw this out because as we're talking about, you kind of, Karen, you sort of brought up this notion of how are we supporting him, like that. But we have someone in the chat who would like to know, how do you continue to measure the success of chapters in a virtual environment? And she mentions here specifically so that the floundering chapters aren't continuing to flounder, and does that take a backseat at this time? So it's really about, this notion of do the rules change? Do the rules I hold my chapters to, do they change? Any thoughts on that? Who would like? That's a question I'm just throwing out there that came from the group. What? Alan, go for it.
Hi, Cindy. I know Cindy.
Oh, good.
So actually, one of the things that has come out of this is we've toyed with the idea down the road of creating a virtual chapter for the organization because there may be new areas, or we may lose some groups, or they may falter. I'll just point out there's one point of opportunity with this. In the past, we had a lot of, our well-known chapters in large cities had no problem getting sponsor money for events. Now with everything virtual, we've had at least one or two sponsors come to us at National and say, what chapters are out there where that we may not know where that money exists? Like, we have a pretty active affiliate group in Nebraska. Let me tell you, nobody thinks about Nebraska when they're thinking about sponsoring an event. It's the two coasts usually. So I do think that there is potential to leverage that from a monetary standpoint down the road.
Mm-hmm. I love that. And you, of course, brought in part of the questions on that, what's going to change is the sponsorship question. Yeah. So thanks. Anybody else, though, on this conversation around, are you changing the checklist or the requirements, the rules? Jessica?
Yeah.
I think no, you don't change the requirements, you don't change the rules, primarily because you might not be able to. It might be a part of your bylaws and your policies that you're not able to be as flexible as you might need to be when circumstances like this that nobody could possibly imagine kind of arise. So at what point, have you planned for this type of contingency? I think most people can say safely, no, they haven't. So that doesn't reduce the legal requirements. That doesn't reduce the financial requirements. It doesn't reduce any of those, any of the value proposition that we've promised our members from every level, headquarters to chapters. So I don't think that it changes anything, but I do think it gives us an opportunity to reevaluate how we're operating so that we're able to be a little bit more nimble in these for these mile markers moving forward in support of our chapters, in support of our membership, because ultimately we want them to be set up to succeed and not set up to fail.
Okay, great. Wes, jump in.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, the way we measure success at our chapter level, we've always tried to measure it by engagement metrics. We don't, so no, we're not going to achieve the financial goals that we set at the beginning of the year in this particular line. We all recognize that. However, we traditionally try to measure by how many people engage at your activity. Is there an increase in the number of participation? Or is the percentage of members in your online community increasing or decreasing? So in this new environment, they're in some ways outperforming previously. As I mentioned, they're reaching 8, 9, 10 times more people than they had in the past. And since that has been how we try to evaluate when we're communicating with our chapters, the finances, that we manage that internally, right? Volunteers, we want them focusing on engagement. Mm-hmm. And the engagement's out the roof, right? So, for us, you know, this is not a good situation, but we've seen some increases in the level of engagement. They're bringing in more prospects. Members in, you know, Nova Scotia that rarely engage with the organization, all of a sudden are now on a couple of webcasts a month, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we're trying to view it through that lens, and we are communicating it, the successes, to our chapters in that lens, because that's why they're here. That's why they're contributing time.
So I love that. I mean, what I heard you say was you don't have to change the checklist and the rules if you have the right checklist and rules in place, i.e. engagement, because that's really what this is for. So there's two kinds of related questions coming, one from chat and one from the Q&A. So let me kind of merge these together. And I'm going to, Nabil, just so you know, I'm going to come to you because the first part of the question is really teeing off of something you said, which is that component and chapter relations are part of your association strategic plan. And so the question really is, well, what type of goals and initiatives are you focusing on to grow the chapters? And before you answer that, I want to sort of merge this a little bit, because the other question in Q&A is, should we, can we, could we, will it be successful if we do begin to think of growth in chapters, growth, getting the number of members involved, getting the number of members to join, and, you know, build new chapters. I mean, so Nabil, start with what you're doing, and then I'd like the rest of the group to kind of weigh in on this. Has anyone seen the true chapter member growth or growth in chapters? And do you think that's kind of a legitimate thing to use right now?
So two things to start. One is our chapters are independently incorporated. So they're all, some are 501c3, but most are C6.
Mm-hmm.
And then second, they are the minor league for our board. Like, we pull primarily from chapter leaders. So I think that's part of the origin why this is so important to my board. So historically, because they're independent organizations, we have tried to keep some lines separate, and membership recruitment was one of them. So we would give chapters routinely lists of our members, but it was up to each chapter to do the marketing to recruit new members. And I think with this chapter goal being a priority, I am starting to blur that line. I am intentionally putting in our efforts to do marketing, because I have staff. They don't have staff. If they have a staff member, it is an admin person or a bookkeeper, accountant person, usually half-time or less. So we are starting to do advertising both to new members of the organization to get them to join chapters, and then to chapters that are to members in an area, because we have it separated by zip codes, to join their chapter. So current members to join their chapter. And we're going to do it in a systematic way so we can start to assess how effective our marketing efforts are. So we're going to be looking at the outcomes here. And I think with the increase in virtual events, it may have some payout for the larger chapters. For the smaller ones, we're going to have to help them because they are really struggling with how to do virtual events.
Right.
Because they're so volunteer driven.
Yeah, so much so. Karen, did you want to weigh in? I saw your head nodding. Okay. Anybody else in terms of what you're expecting of your chapters for either a member growth or chapter growth?
I can weigh in if that's all right, Peggy. Our expectation is, I think, maintaining status quo right now, and I think that our data has been supportive in that we haven't really seen any more drop off than we have in the past. We've seen a relatively steady amount of renewals coming in. So we're not too concerned. The National Board has been looking at all of those figures as well and keeping that top of mind to make decisions based off of our governance strategy and our program strategy, et cetera, to make sure that we're still able to service our members in the way that we want to service them. So I think that initially we will see I think, a decrease in membership overall, but I think it'll be small, and I think it'll be temporary.
Mm-hmm.
So I think right now, the best we can hope for is maintaining our numbers. And from our perspective, because we are integrated organization, none of our chapters are incorporated. There's a heavy lift on us to help support their efforts there. Engagement is a recruitment, I'm sorry, is not a recruitment tool necessarily. It's a retention tool.
Yes.
Yeah, and I think, like Wes, what you were saying earlier about how you're reaching more people because, you know, humans are social creatures. They want to be engaged when there are laws that are preventing them from being close to one another physically. So they're looking for other ways to engage their mind, to engage with their community and all aspects of their community. And so we're reaching actually a lot of more potential members because of that. By decisions like making our education content free for members and non-members for a while, things like that. So I mean, we're reaching more people that we hadn't reached before. We're engaging different people that we hadn't engaged before, and it's all a result of you know, sheltering in place and COVID-19 and everything else that goes along with it.
So it sounds like what I'm really hearing in many ways are sort of two responses to this question, and one is, if the focus is on engagement, then we're not really saying go out and get more members. We're saying do the really good stuff, and some members are coming in, which is kind of good. And then Nabil saying, well, you know, actually, and part of the new support is going to be around us taking a bigger role in that. So I know that, like the dental hygienists, for example, I know that they've seen a really beautiful uptick in membership, and large of it was because many of their chapters were doing the advocacy work that was so critical to assure a safe work environment when dental hygienists went back. And so I know to the person the question asked is that's a case where, like Nabil, the national organization drove the conversation and the support and enabled the chapters to do it, and they are doing it. So hopefully to our questioner, that did give you some response there. I want to go for just a moment to the question that the group of us had talked about for a while, which I thought was pretty cool, was this notion of the member value proposition, and that's what's driving so much of our conversation. So here's my question. If we're going to have a blurring of lines and we have chapters having a much more expanded reach and all that stuff we've talked about, do you see the role of chapters increasing or decreasing in importance on this? Increasing or decreasing in importance on this? Jessica, when we were talking earlier, you had some thoughts there.
Yeah, I see the importance of a chapter increasing, but I see the structure of it changing. And I don't think we can have those conversations independently. In order for us to talk about the future and moving forward, we have to take a look at our business operations and strategies and make some accommodations to like I said earlier, set our components up for success, which is ultimately setting our members up for success. So I think it'll be increased, the importance of it, but I do think that the structure might change, and probably in a lot of good ways.
Yes, cool. Anybody else want to weigh in on that? And I'd like to get some more thoughts on this notion of yes, and we have to change the structure to make it happen.
Yeah,
Yes.
I'll chime in. I believe that the chapters, at least again in our structure, are going to be much more important than they are moving forward, because right now every market is virtual content, sitting in front of a screen and learning, right? But in my opinion, the true value that chapters and chapter volunteers bring to most organizations, at least a large part of it, are those connections. And yes, the word's networking, but I like to use the word relationship building, right? It's more than just networking. It's people going to a program, meeting someone, a local program, then a month later, seeing them again, and hey, how did you handle that thing at work, right? Those types of things are what make nonprofit membership communities, chapters in particular, I think so valuable. But in this new environment, that doesn't exist, right? So one of the things we're going to be looking at moving forward, because that's kind of how our chapters like to serve their communities, we're thinking about how can we incorporate that into our educational programming. So maybe we have one of our headquarters workshops, but a particular chapter hosts a happy hour networking after the program. Just something that where it's not educational content. It's just that, you know, that humaning with one another, right? So we haven't figured all this out, and you know, we're going to bring our chapter leaders into that conversation as we think about it. But that's how I envision chapters being important and helping to continue to drive not just the professional part, education part of our membership, but also that relationship building, which again, I think is so important.
I have a suggestion for the networking relationship building from my chapters. So I visit a lot of chapters in the past, and one of the best strategies that I've seen at one of our larger chapters is every attendee gets 15 seconds to mention something. And that 15 seconds might be, I'm looking for referrals for X, I have office space to rent, I am, you know, starting a workshop. That strategy can still be done virtually. It's a little bit more complicated because you have to call on someone. There, you would go table to table and literally point at someone, 15 seconds, timer, next, and keep going. But this strategy I've seen happen in person really well, and I've heard it occurring at some of my larger chapters. I think it peaks out at 50 attendees, but it allows that networking and that member value to be retained. And so I've been teaching that to a lot of my struggling chapters, how to do this in a virtual way.
Very nice. Very nice.
So let me push a little bit harder on this conversation of the member value proposition, because even what you're saying, Nabil and Wes, and just it's going to be virtual. So now I can have that conversation and know what you need from Nabil's standpoint. But I'm in Columbia, Maryland, and I just as easy hearing somebody from Alabama or Tennessee, and all of a sudden I realize they have got something that that was very different. So now, do I need to go back to the chapter when the chapter has a face-to-face event? I mean, what's the value that's going to stay at the at that really critical level? And I'm going to push on that. And then Nabil, you just got a question in chat, if you can answer it in chat, but go ahead. Any thoughts on that? Ellen, you're ready.
Go ahead, Ellen. Go ahead.
I was just gonna piggyback on, I think value proposition is gonna be extremely, I think it's gonna be the association buzzword over the next 12 months, especially if you have an association where the membership value is in a discount to annual convention. If that's not happening, I'll say this, our association's a little bit lucky. We're redoing our entire value proposition, our membership model. So this kind of happened at a good time. But that value proposition, I think it goes back to what Wes is saying, like networking, like local networking is going to be paramount. And we actually surveyed our chapters who have been using the Zoom account. And we said, you know, what's working, what's not? And they said, the networking's good, but there's no way it's ever going to replace the face-to-face. And that is really, I mean, I would not be surprised in 12 months if we were doing, the talk was all about micro meetings where it's 6 or fewer people meeting in person. And that's how things are going to start happening. Our San Diego chapter, for example, every single month, a different tech firm would host anybody from the chapter to get a layout of their building and job opportunities and their culture. And that was a huge membership driver for the San Diego chapter. Obviously, that's not happening. So the value proposition, I think, is going to change exponentially, not only at the national level, but chapter to chapter in what they offer. So it's going to come down to networking, I think, and what can be done.
I just want to echo that. I mean, so much for our members. I mean, just about any SWE member you talk to will talk about how they found either their current job or a previous job through SWE. And you know, yes, we have a big career fair, and this year we're going to have a big virtual career fair, but often it was somebody from my section who I got to talking with over the course of a year or 6 months, and I didn't even know I was looking, but they recognized my skill set or something and said, you know, we've got an opportunity in our organization. Would you be interested? And so, yes, some of that can happen virtually. We know that, but really it's about that personal connection. And I think people, I feel like the pent up demand, once this changes or we have a vaccine or whatever, is going to be there, and people are going to want to go back to having some of those more local activities. And to Alan's point, maybe that's 6 people or 8 people. But I think that the value that our members see from that personal connection locally is going to be there, COVID or not. And so I think for us as organizations, maybe it's to help position our sections and chapters and affiliates to be ready for that, and to whatever that new normal is going to look like for them, to make sure that they're ready for that and they can facilitate that, because I think the demand is going to be greater than ever before.
So let's stay with that point for just a moment, Karen, because I think that really is the crux of it. If we believe in our heart the value proposition, it may shift, but it's still going to be there. It does mean that we have to support the chapters in the new normal, right? It does mean that we have to support them. So are you thinking now about additional support, or maybe it's just the direction? Maybe it's just taking somebody and pointing the chapter in a different direction. Karen, can you just continue with that a little bit more?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's definitely something we want to do. I feel like we're still in this crystal ball.
We got a little bit of a delay.
What's going to happen next? I feel like it's too soon to know exactly what the direction is to give them. But yeah, absolutely. I think that's something, whether it's training, whether it's toolkits or other resources, that's definitely going to be a priority as we start to see what that next normal is.
Great. Anyone else want to jump into that? And let's expand the question a little bit to the person who just posted. If they're all run by volunteers and many of them have jobs on the line, how do we support them emotionally in a personal? So anybody else want to weigh in on this whole support issue and expanding it even to just supporting the personal or emotional needs?
I can jump in if that's all right. I actually think there's going to be a requirement for parent organizations or national organizations to minimize the structure and framework around which components are operating. But I think in order to do that, they're going to have a heavier lift on protections, liabilities, legal things like that, and making sure that we are all up to date and up to speed on, what's happening state to state, to provide the type of advice that we can provide them in order to protect them the best that we can. And I think, especially when you're doing 100% volunteer top to bottom run, people are scared, they're afraid. There's a psychological component that we really haven't talked about, but everybody feels, and that is, yes, I'm human, I'm gonna want to get out there, there's gonna be pent up a need for it, and I'm gonna wanna go there, but am I gonna feel safe? Am I going to be safe from a liability perspective if I'm operating on behalf of this organization? Who can tell me that? So I think that there's going to be, and there already has been, in my experience, those specific questions asked by our volunteer leaders. Is it okay for us to do this? And what's the answer? What's the response? So I think that there's going to be, there's a need for parent organizations or headquarter organizations to do their due diligence from a legal standpoint to make sure that they are protected, as well as their organizational components are protected in a way that allows them to still continue to service the mission and provide that value proposition, which right now in this space, to me, from my perspective, is providing a healthy member experience. And that member experience is not necessarily defined by what we're doing, it's defined by what our members need.
So critical to start with the member. That is like that's like a gem that we need to repeat over and over again. Anybody else want to jump into that? I have one more question to ask you guys, which will be a fast round, but on this question of support, anything else to add?
I think there's just going to be a shift. Like my experience, one of the biggest areas of staff support has always been on like accounting and finance for chapters, and with no events happening, I think that's going to shift to technology and virtual help with platforms. I think we're going to see a shift there, just because if you don't have a $100,000 event, you don't have to worry about the receipts and the tracking and all of that. So you're going to be looking for help in other areas. But it's definitely to the chat question about, leaders worried about things. We're meeting next week for our year-end reports that our chapters are required to do, and seeing how we can streamline that, make it easier so that it is less painful. And, if they can do it all online and not have to mail anything in or attachments, we're going to go down that road.
So, I mean, that from my little heart, Alan, that is like overdue anyway. Some of the organizations have been like, we have just been overburdening our volunteers with how they have to respond to us. But I also, just like that notion of the support we give is going to have to be different. So we really might have to help them understand how to do a virtual event or how to make money doing a bunch of 6-up micro meetings. I wrote down micro meetings, by the way, Alan. Thank you. I love that. So I think that's really good. Okay, guys, we got 5 minutes left. This has been fabulous. I think that ASAE should have let us go 90 minutes, but you know how that is. We're all sitting in front of a camera. So my final question, speed round for us, is what is your forecast for your chapters in 2021? What is your forecast for your chapters in 2021? Is anybody ready to jump off the block there? Alan, go.
I actually have a list. We surveyed our chapters that are doing the virtual thing. The number one thing we saw when it first happened, they were all doing networking happy hours. Now they're moving to coffee hours happening during work hours because they're in front of the camera all day long, and at 5 o'clock they want to get off. So I think that's a huge thing. So evenings have kind of fallen out of favor. And they're starting to move into group activities, watching a movie, reading a book, and then having discussions on that, bringing in the author. So I think there's that. And it's also the last thing is burnout. A lot of our folks are just starting to burn out, and they're really wanting compelling content in order to log in.
Content is king, absolutely. Who wants to go next? Wes, I see you nodding. Let's have you go.
Yeah, I'll go next. I mean, I think obviously the new normal, whatever that looks like, is going to dictate, right, what chapters look like. But I think all of us on this webcast would also agree, chapters, that's the benefit of them. They're nimble. They can adapt. They can adjust much more easily than the headquarter organization. So it's really hard to say what it's going to look like, but I would say what I'm planning to do is include them in that conversation, is to have them have a conversation with headquarters so we help dictate what that looks like together.
Awesome, thank you. Karen.
And I would just build off the nimbleness. I think we're going to see a lot more innovation, because you're going to have to. I mean, even just from a headquarters perspective, we've been able to innovate some things and roll some things out that before would have required a lot more red tape. And so I think our local contingents are going to be able to innovate and try some things and be a lot more creative than maybe they've been in the past, because what's the worst thing that's going to happen? It's a new world. So I'm excited to see what some of the things that they might come up with are going to be.
Awesome. Nabil.
I'm seeing lots of growth and opportunity. I am testing out the strategies at the chapter level. It's less risk for my parent organization. And I can fail or, hit a grand slam quickly and easily with my chapter events than I can with a high profile event that the parent organization puts out.
Great. And Jessica, bring us home.
Right. I think that we'll be failing forward a lot, to kind of piggyback off of what Karen was saying. It's an opportunity to reinform how we do business as associations. And we're in a unique position in time that might require us to be architects to reinvent some wheels of past business practices that no longer serve us now or in the future. So it's an exciting time, and I look forward to seeing what comes out of it.
Oh my gosh, I love the five of you. The optimism is fabulous. We're just about to turn to the top of the hour. I want to, oh my gosh, I want to thank you all because, and the comments coming in, the questions coming in have been very laudatory to you guys. I think that the most important thing is that I heard, or my takeaway is forever beta. That's how I put it, forever beta. And we now have permission to truly be forever beta in our structures and our support. And Nabil, I love it. The low risk opportunity for us to try some new things. Karen made that point. Wes made that point. Alan made that point. Jessica made the point. I'm Peggy Hoffman. Thank you, the five of you, for giving us your 60 minutes today. The webcast will be recorded and posted on the website. Any additional topics you'd like to hear about, learning at asaecenter.org. It's been a pleasure. Enjoy the rest of your day. Stay in touch with us.
Thank you.